The millionaire invited the black cleaning lady as a joke. She arrived like a diva, and everyone was in absolute shock when they found out who she really was. The main hall of the Blackwood Mansion in Beverly Hills exploded with malicious laughter when Victoria Sterling descended the marble staircase wearing a dress that cost more than the annual salary of most of the people present. It wasn't laughter of admiration. It was pure, cruel mockery. "Look who decided to show up, Richard," Blackwood whispered to his guests, raising his glass of Dom Perignon champagne. "Our dear cleaning lady." Victoria was 35 years old and never imagined she would one day step foot in that ballroom as a guest, even if it was a cruel joke. For 2 years she had cleaned every inch of that mansion, always invisible, always silent. She watched those rich people treat each other with rehearsed falsehoods while treating her like furniture. The invitation had arrived 3 days earlier, delivered with a cruel smile she knew all too well. "Charity gala on Saturday," Richard said, handing her the gold envelope. "Dress code, maximum elegance. You surely have something suitable in your wardrobe, don't you?" The laughter of his friends echoed through the hallway. It was an obvious trap, an attempt to humiliate her publicly, to put her in her place in front of California's high society. Richard had even invited social reporters to document what he called an educational moment. "Let's make a bet," Richard said to his wife Helena as Victoria vacuumed the day before. $100,000 says she doesn't have the nerve to show up. And if she does, she'll be the entertainment for the evening. Helena laughed maliciously. "You're terrible, Richard. The poor thing will probably show up in something borrowed and feel so out of place she'll leave within 15 minutes. But Richard Blackwood didn't know two fundamental things about Victoria. First, she had grown up in halls like that long before she ever had to clean them to survive. Second, some storms don't destroy. They teach you how to dance in the rain. As she walked through the hall under the mocking glances, Victoria kept her posture straight and her gaze serene, like someone carrying secrets that could turn that world upside down. Her steps were sure, calculated, as if each movement were part of a long-rehearsed choreography. "My God, she really came," whispered Patricia Weston, wife of a senator, to her friend. "And look how she's dressed." "Where did she get that dress?" "She probably rented it and will pay for it in 10 installments," replied Vivian Chambers, daughter of an oil magnate, disguising her own insecurity with cruelty. How pathetic. What none of those people knew was that Victoria hadn't bought, borrowed, or rented that dress. She had simply gone back into her own past to retrieve it, a past Richard would have done anything to erase if he had known it existed. Richard approached her, his chest puffed out with arrogance, surrounded by his billionaire friends. His confidence was sky high. After all, he had orchestrated this as a public display of power and social control. "Victoria, what a pleasant surprise. I never doubted you'd come. After all, when a person like you receives an invitation to an event like this, person like me?" Victoria repeated, her calm voice cutting through the air like sharp silk. "Go on, Richard. Finish your sentence." For a microscopic moment, something in her tone made Richard hesitate. There was a firmness there that didn't match the submissive woman he knew from the halls of the mansion, but arrogance quickly returned. "Well, you know, someone who doesn't normally frequent this kind of environment. You must be feeling quite intimidated by all this elegance." Victoria smiled. Not a submissive or nervous smile, but something dangerously serene that made some nearby guests stop laughing instinctively. "Intimidated?" she repeated softly, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made Richard take a step back without realizing it. "No, Richard. I'm feeling exactly where I've always belonged." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough to shift the atmosphere of the entire party. There was something about the way Victoria spoke, the way she moved, the way she occupied the space, that defied every expectation people had of who she should be. Richard cleared his throat, trying to regain control. Well, I hope you enjoy the evening. I'm sure it will be educational for you. Oh, I'm sure it will be educational. For all of us, Victoria replied, her gaze sweeping slowly across the group of guests, as if cataloging each face for future use. If you're enjoying this story of twists and justice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because what those privileged people didn't know was that Victoria carried a secret so explosive it would turn that night of planned humiliation into the greatest lesson on prejudice Beverly Hills had ever witnessed. Richard was having more fun than he had imagined. Victoria hadn't run away in embarrassment as he'd expected. She remained there, her strangely confident posture beginning to bother him in an inexplicable way. "Everyone," Richard announced loudly, tapping a silver spoon against his crystal glass to get the guests' attention. "I'd like to introduce our special guest tonight, Victoria, our dedicated cleaning lady." Laughter echoed through the hall like cruel waves. Cell phone flashes went off as socialites snapped photos, eager to post sarcastic captions online. "Richard," Helena murmured beside him, feigning concern. "Don't you think you're being a little cruel?" "Cruel?" Richard laughed loudly. "I'm giving her the opportunity of a lifetime. When else would someone like her ever get the chance to attend an event like this?" Victoria stood motionless in the center of the room, all eyes fixed on her. But instead of embarrassment, her expression carried something disconcerting, a serenity that came only from someone who had weathered far worse storms. Patricia Weston approached with her group of friends, all wearing poisonous smiles. "Victoria, dear, tell me, how long did it take you to choose that dress? It must have been so challenging to find something suitable." "Actually," Victoria replied with a calmness that made Patricia hesitate, "this dress has a very special history. It belonged to my mother." "Her mother?" Vivian Chambers laughed nasally. "And where did her mother get a dress like that? At some fancy thrift store?" Victoria smiled, but there was something dangerous in that smile. "My mother wore this dress the last time she was in a ballroom like this. That was 20 years ago, when she was still Victoria Temps Blackwood." The silence that followed was deafening. Conversation stopped as people realized something significant was being revealed. Richard, who had been laughing with his close friends, turned slowly. "What did you say? Temps Blackwood?" "Victoria Temps Blackwood," she repeated, her voice cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "It's funny how some people choose to conveniently forget their own family history." Richard's face began to pale. Helena instinctively grabbed her husband's arm, sensing something was terribly wrong. "You're delirious," Richard said, though his voice was less firm than he intended. "I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't a game." "No, Richard," Victoria said, stepping toward him as several guests instinctively backed away. "It's history. Our history. The history you tried to erase when you decided it was more convenient to pretend that certain people in our family never existed." The cell phone cameras kept recording, but now for a completely different reason. Whispers spread like wildfire. Helena pulled at Richard's arm. "What is she talking about?" "She's lying," Richard snapped, though his hands trembled slightly. "She's a deranged employee trying to get attention." Victoria reached into her purse and pulled out an object that made several guests gasp. It was a ring, not just any ring, but the traditional Blackwood family engagement ring, engraved with the family crest and featuring the distinctive blue sapphire passed down for generations. "This ring," Victoria said, holding it high for all to see, "was given to my mother by her father, Henry Blackwood. My grandfather, the man you told your children died without an heir." Richard was visibly shaken. "Where did you get this? How dare you steal?" "Steal," Victoria laughed, though there was no humor in the sound. "Richard, you can't steal something that is rightfully yours by birthright," Patricia Weston whispered to her friend. My God, do you think she's telling the truth? Impossible, Vivian murmured, though her voice no longer sounded confident. Richard would have told us if he had a cousin. Victoria heard and turned to them. Cousin? No, dear. I'm not Richard's cousin. She paused dramatically, then looked Richard directly in the eye. I'm his half-sister. The room erupted in murmurs and muffled exclamations. Richard looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. This is ridiculous, he shouted, but his voice cracked. My father would never... You're making this up. Henry Blackwood had an affair with my mother Isabella for 5 years, Victoria continued relentlessly. She was the family's piano teacher. When she became pregnant with me, your father promised to take care of us, and he kept that promise until the day he died. Helena now had one hand over her mouth, staring between Victoria and Richard as though watching a slow-motion car crash. You, Richard, Victoria said, pointing directly at him, decided it would be easier to pretend we never existed. You cut off our allowance, sold the house your father bought for my mother, and left us in absolute poverty. I had no obligation to... Richard began. You had no obligation to take care of your father's family, Victoria interrupted sharply. Interesting philosophy, considering you inherited 100% of a fortune that should have been divided between us. Her words hung in the air, sinking into the minds of the guests. Many began to step away from Richard as though scandal could spread through mere proximity. Prove it, Richard said desperately. Anyone can make up a story and wave around a ring. Victoria's smile turned predatory. Oh, Richard, do you really think I came here without proof? She lifted her phone and signaled to someone at the entrance. They can come in now. 3 people entered the hall. People who would change everyone's lives forever. The first was Diane Morrison, Beverly Hills' most respected investigative journalist. The second was David Chun, a renowned inheritance lawyer. And the third made Richard stagger as if he'd been punched in the stomach. Dr. Hamilton? Helena gasped, recognizing the Blackwood family's private physician. What are you doing here? Dr. Hamilton, who had treated Henry Blackwood in his final years, stepped forward. His hands shook, but his voice was steady. 20 years. Ago, I was forced to sign a falsified death certificate. Henry Blackwood did not die of natural causes. He was slowly poisoned with arsenic over a period of months. The hall erupted in cries of shock. Please, Diane Morrison raised her hand. Keep your phone steady. This is an official confession being recorded for legal purposes. You're insane, Richard shouted, sweating profusely. My father died of heart problems. No, Dr. Hamilton said firmly. Your father discovered the money you'd been embezzling from the company for years. He had changed his will to include Victoria and was preparing to report you to the police when he suddenly began showing strange symptoms. Victoria remained silent, tears of relief glistening in her eyes. Finally, after 20 years, the truth was being spoken aloud. David Chun opened his briefcase and took out an official document. This blood sample was tested last week by an independent laboratory. The arsenic levels were fatal. You're making this up, Richard shouted, his voice completely uncontrolled. It's a conspiracy to ruin me. Diane Morrison stepped forward. Mr. Blackwood, I have transcripts of 5 conversations you had with Dr. Hamilton between 2003 and 2004, where you threatened to ruin him professionally. Victoria finally spoke, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Richard, you didn't just kill our father, you stole 20 years of my life. I didn't kill anyone. Richard pointed his finger wildly around the room. You're all lying? Then explain this, said Victoria, connecting her phone to the mansion's sound system. A recording began to play. Richard's voice was unmistakable. Hamilton, you're going to keep your mouth shut about anything strange you found in the old man's blood. If you open your mouth, I guarantee you'll never work as a doctor again. And as for that woman and her bastard daughter, they'll have to fend for themselves. The silence that followed was absolute. Even those who had defended Richard now shunned him as if he were radioactive. Helena stared at her husband in horror. "Richard, you really did this?" 20 years, Victoria screamed, her composure breaking momentarily. 20 years of cleaning my own father's blood off the hands of his killer. She took a deep breath, regaining her deadly calm. "You want to know how I got all this evidence? I didn't come to work here by accident. I applied specifically for this position. I spent 2 years preparing, gaining access to the house, collecting evidence. Richard tried one last desperate gambit. Even if all that is true, it doesn't change anything. The inheritance was distributed years ago." David Chun smiled for the first time. "Actually, Mr. Blackwood, when there is evidence of murder, all assets can be redistributed according to the original will, and we have a copy of Henry Blackwood's actual will." Victoria approached Richard, who was leaning against the wall like a cornered animal. "Do you know what my biggest mistake was, Richard? Believing that you would change on your own?" "Please," Richard whispered, all arrogance gone. "Helena, the children, this will destroy our family." "You destroyed our family the moment you chose money over justice." Richard collapsed into an armchair, completely defeated. His transformation from arrogant millionaire to exposed criminal had taken less than 2 hours. Victoria looked at him one last time. He was broken. But this was only the beginning. What Richard didn't realize, and would soon discover in the worst possible way, was that Victoria had spent years gathering evidence not only about her father's death, but also about all the financial crimes, blackmail, and corruption Richard had committed over the decades, weaving a web of justice so meticulous that his downfall would be spectacularly complete. The next 2 hours turned the most exclusive gala in Beverly Hills into the biggest scandal California high society had ever witnessed, live. Richard now sat on the floor of the ballroom, his back against the wall, watching his entire life unravel in real time. Diane Morrison connected her laptop to the mansion's projection system, and documents, photos, and recordings appeared on the giant screen for all the guests to see. "This," Diane narrated, "is a bank transfer of $200,000 from Richard Blackwood's personal account to Dr. Hamilton, dated 3 days after Henry Blackwood's death." The memo on the transfer read, "Silence is golden." Helena now stood on the other side of the room, as far away from her husband as possible, crying silently as she processed 20 years of lies. "And this," Diane continued, "is a recording of Richard talking to his accountant about how to hide the company's embezzlement." Richard's voice echoed through the room. "I need you to make the numbers dance. If anyone finds out I've taken out $20 million over the last 5 years, I'm ruined. Blame it on market fluctuations, expansion costs, whatever." Patricia Weston whispered to her friend, "My God, he stole from his own company." Victoria remained in the center of the room, calm, the eye of a hurricane, watching each revelation systematically destroy the life of the man who had murdered her father. David Chun approached with a new folder. "Mr. Blackwood, in addition to the criminal charges, I must inform you that Miss Thames is filing a $50 million civil suit against you for wrongful death and misappropriation of inheritance." $50 million? Richard looked up with glazed eyes. "I don't have $50 million. "No," Victoria said softly, "but your company is worth $120 million, and half of it has always been mine by right." Diane Morrison continued her devastating presentation. "We also have evidence that Richard blackmailed at least 5 local politicians, bribed 3 judges, and diverted charity funds to personal accounts." Each new revelation drew gasps of horror from the guests. People who had arrived as Richard's friends now moved away as if his corruption could contaminate them. "Victoria," Richard said in a broken voice, "please, you got what you wanted. Stop this." Victoria stepped forward and knelt in front of him, looking directly into his eyes. "Richard, you killed our father." You stole my family, my inheritance, my dignity. You made me clean his blood off your hands for 2 years. I can make it up to you, he whispered desperately. There is no making up for 20 years of injustice, Victoria replied with haunting calm. But there are consequences. Helena's phone rang. It was one of their children calling from college. Mom, is everything okay? They're saying on the internet that Dad is a murderer. Helena looked at Richard with utter disgust. Your own children are finding out what kind of monster you are on social media. Richard tried to stand, but his legs gave way. Helena, please, the children, no! Helena screamed, silencing the entire room. You don't mention our children. You've shamed them forever. Dr. Hamilton approached Victoria. Miss Thames, I must inform you that I have already contacted the police. Richard would be arrested later that day for murder. Murder, fraud, blackmail, tax evasion, Victoria listed calmly. He will spend the rest of his life in prison. She turned to the guests, who watched her with a mixture of admiration and fear. I want everyone to understand one thing. I didn't do this for revenge. I did this for justice, for all the people who have been trampled on by men like Richard Blackwood. Patricia Weston stepped forward hesitantly. Victoria, we're so sorry. We didn't know. You knew, Victoria replied firmly. You knew I was treated like less than human. You laughed. You participated. The only difference is that now you know I have more money than you. The sound of sirens echoed outside. The police had arrived. Richard looked at Victoria one last time. You've destroyed my life. No, Victoria said, standing tall with all her dignity. You destroyed your own life the moment you chose evil. I just made sure the truth came out. As the police officers entered to arrest Richard, Victoria walked onto the balcony. Outside, dozens of reporters waited. TV cameras, photographers, journalists. The story had already spread. Helena approached her. Victoria, I really didn't know anything. I know, Victoria said gently. You were also his victim. What's going to happen now? Victoria looked out at the sparkling city below. Now, Helena, justice will finally be served, and maybe Beverly Hills will learn that class has nothing to do with a bank account. As Richard was led away in handcuffs through the very hall, where he had once tried to humiliate her, Victoria felt something she hadn't felt in 20 years, peace. What Richard didn't yet realize, but would discover in jail within hours, was that Victoria had planned every detail, not only of his downfall, but also of the rebuilding of her own life. The Blackwood Empire now had a new heir, one who would use its power to protect the people Richard had once crushed. 6 months later, Victoria Temps. Blackwood sat in Richard's former office, now completely renovated. The walls that had once displayed trophies of arrogance now held certificates from social projects and photos of employees who had risen from entry-level jobs to executive positions. Richard had been sentenced to 25 years in prison without parole. The charges included murder, corporate fraud, blackmail, and tax evasion. His personal fortune had been confiscated to compensate his victims. Miss Temps Blackwood, said Amanda, her new executive assistant, once a cleaner in the same building. Forbes magazine is here for your interview about the company's transformation. Victoria smiled. In just 6 months, she had increased company profits by 40% simply by treating employees like human beings. Fair wages, promotions based on merit, and a respectful workplace had created productivity Richard's toxic leadership had never achieved. Helena had divorced Richard immediately and moved out of state with her children. Before leaving, she apologized to Victoria in person. You could have destroyed us completely, but you chose to protect my children. I'll never forget your generosity. Children don't pay for their parents' sins, Victoria had replied. They deserve the chance to become better people than he was. Dr. Hamilton now worked as a medical consultant for the company, providing free health care to all employees. I never thought I'd have the courage to do the right thing, he admitted during a meeting. But you taught me it's never too late to find our dignity. Patricia Weston and Vivian Chambers tried to reach out in the weeks following the scandal, but Victoria kept them at a polite distance. You laughed at me when you thought I was beneath you. Now you want my friendship because of my bank account. That says everything about you. Victoria's story went viral worldwide. She was invited to speak at universities about leadership and social justice, but she preferred to focus on the real work. I don't want to be famous for suffering, she said in a rare interview. I want to be known for what I built afterward. The company now sponsored scholarships for employees' children, ran a microcredit program for entrepreneurs in underserved communities, and had created the largest domestic violence support fund in California. One quiet afternoon, Victoria received a letter from prison. It was from Richard. Victoria, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know. You taught me that I became a monster. I spend every day trying to understand how I could kill my own father for money. My children asked about you during their last visit. They want to meet the aunt who protected the family when their father failed. Victoria kept the letter, but did not reply. Forgiveness was a personal journey. Justice had already been served. During her Forbes interview, the journalist asked, "Some people say your revenge was too cruel. What do you say to that?" "Revenge," Victoria replied calmly, "would have been doing to him what he did to me. Justice is ensuring he pays for his crimes and making sure others never suffer what I suffered. There's a fundamental difference between the two." "And what advice would you give to people facing similar injustices?" Victoria looked out the window at employees enjoying lunch in the garden, a garden that now represented respect and dignity. The best revenge is not destroying those who hurt you. It's building something so great that the injustice you suffered becomes only the first chapter of a story of triumph. That night, Victoria returned home, not to the small apartment where she had once dreamed of justice, but to a comfortable house where she was raising 2 orphaned children who, like her, deserved a second chance. As she helped the girls with their homework, she thought of the father she had never truly known, but whose blood ran in her veins. Henry Blackwood would be proud. His daughter had not only reclaimed what was stolen, but had transformed a company built on exploitation into a symbol of dignity and opportunity. Victoria's real victory wasn't dethroning Richard. It was proving that power built on justice, rather than fear, multiplies and uplifts everyone around it. Richard had once tried to humiliate a cleaning lady. In the end, he discovered he had underestimated an abyss. More importantly, he learned too late that dignity cannot be bought, inherited, or stolen. It is earned through the choices we make when no one is watching. If this story of justice touched your heart, subscribe to the channel for more stories that prove good always wins when you have the right strategy. Because sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one everyone chooses to ignore.